Hey there friends, Fritz here with another 10-minute tip, and I wanted to follow up on a demo that I did about 2 weeks ago at .NET Conf. I got a lot of feedback about it, and I want to take a deeper dive on this, go through it a little bit slowly, so that we can see exactly what's going on here, and maybe you can learn a thing or two from this technique. In this case, I took a grid that was in ASP.NET Web Forms, very server-side oriented framework, and I added some features to it to make it feel and behave a lot nicer on a client-side, a richer client-side environment, something like a mobile phone or a tablet might say. So I have very similar grid here on this page, and it's just a grid view that I dragged and dropped onto the screen. I wired up model binding on the server side so I could fetch the data, and I added some sorting capabilities to it so that I could click on these headers and it would sort. But as you can see, it's doing a full page refresh. I do get the sort capability, but it's refreshing the entire screen. Ugh, you know? And it's all bunched up in the corner here. It doesn't feel right. Let me show you real quick how we can make this feel better using the bootstrap capabilities built into the default ASP.NET Web Forms, the default ASP.NET Web Forms templates, and then we'll go back and add Angular to the project. So let's go back over to Visual Studio and reformat this grid a little bit. So here's the source for my grid view, and you can see I've got an item type and a select method there, those new features in ASP.NET 4.5 to allow me to work a little bit easier with the model that I'm binding to this grid, but I want to control the output HTML a little bit more. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to use the useAccessible_header attribute. And what this does is it'll force ASP.NET to add a thead tag in this grid view that's output as HTML. I'll run back over to the browser here, and let's take a look at the source that gets output. So I'll refresh that grid. It'll take a second here to just-in-time compile the grid, and then we should see my HTML output on the page. Alright, so there's my grid. Let's take a look at the markup that makes up that. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to reach into my container. There's my table. So I start to get these TH pieces of markup here, right? The TH element, so that it turns this into a real head. Now, let me go back over to my markup, and let's start adding some other features here to make Bootstrap take a little bit more control over this. So I'm going to add the CSS class of table, so that Bootstrap knows this is a table and I want it to behave as a table. And I'll refresh this page. And things are stretched out a little bit now. It's responsive. My grid fills the screen. If I shrink my browser a little bit here, right, my grid responds appropriately to fill the screen. Not bad. That's a good start. Let's add some other things here to make it a little bit more interesting. So in addition to labeling this as a table, I'll say it's a table striped, and I'll refresh, and now it's striped, right? I've got this nice set of stripes going down my page. All right, let's go one further and let's add the hover capability to this, and that's as easy as saying table hover, and when I refresh now I get this hover capability where it's going to highlight the grid rows that I have my mouse over. Not bad. It's a good start. It's a way for us to make this feel a little bit more modern, right? So those are the types of features that we want, but we want to get away from this full page loop back where, right, we've got to post and wait for it to reload in order for this sort to happen. And that's where Angular comes in, right? We're going to we're going to use the Angular framework so that we have all these features built for us, and we can reference and deliver those features client-side. Let my browser do the work for this. If my server's doing the work, I've only got so many processors on my server. If I let the browser do the work for this simple 6-row sort, I've got those 4 processors that are sitting on someone's tablet or phone doing that work for me. I can scale my work much, much more broadly because I don't have my server doing these simple little processes for everybody. So let's go back over to our source code, and I'm going to show you how we can bring Angular in using some of the new tools in Visual Studio 2015 and wire up these web forms to make it feel a lot more modern and native to my browser. So let's go back over to Visual Studio 2015. I'm going to stop my web server here. Now, I'm going to bring in, using the Node Package Manager, the capabilities of Angular. And some folks ask me, aren't we supposed to be getting packages for ASP.NET from NuGet? Well, NuGet is where we want to bring in our capabilities for ASP.NET, but we want to bring in our server-side capabilities. Those client-side features, really, they're built on the client side, and they're built with JavaScript, they're built with other tools, and the folks that use those other tools that prefer JavaScript server-side development and JavaScript in mobile devices, they prefer to use other package managers like Bower or NPM, the Node Package Manager. And that's what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start to configure my project for NPM use. So I'm going to add a new item. And in this dialog, I'm going to look for NPM, and I'm going to grab my Npm configuration file. So let's add that. And you'll see over here, there's package.json popping up. But you'll see over here, there's package.json. It's always named package.json is the configuration file for NPM. I have this NPM watermark down here. You might not be able to see it. Let me move my video here just a second so you can see it. Now, that watermark that you saw, that came from the Web Essentials tool. Web Essentials will give me a bunch of other capabilities. It's an extension for Visual Studio that you can grab. It's one of the most popular extensions for Visual Studio, but it'll give you some other capabilities to make web development easier. These are not features that you need Web Essentials for. Web Essentials is just giving me that watermark. So let's go find Angular and add it to my project, and I'll do that by putting in this dev dependencies section, and that's actually the wrong area. There's 2 types of dependencies that you put down in Angular: dev dependencies and dependencies. Dev dependencies are those things that you need to develop your application. Dependencies are those things that you need in order to build your application. So they're going to be shipped with your application when you go to deploy. So let's change this to just dependencies. And inside here, I just hit Control Space, and you can see I'm getting from Visual Studio 2015 some IntelliSense from the npm.js repository. And I'm going to go find Angular. That's what I want, and I'm going to choose a version. So I'm going to bring in 1.5.7, the latest stable version. Now, when I save that, behind the scenes, Visual Studio is going to go and start filling out, you don't see it here yet, it's going to go and start filling out the node modules folder appropriate for the content that comes in from NPM. So I don't see it loading up here. Let me right click on this, and I believe I can say restore packages, and it'll start to build out that NPM, that node modules folder. There it is, node modules. And it's going to start filling out those things that I need for Angular. Now, what I really want is just that Angular min.js file. I only care about the minified version of it. I'm not debugging into anything else that's going on inside of Angular. So let me just add a reference to that Angular min.js into my site master page. So I'll do that. I'll open site master, And I'm going to go down to the bottom of my page. Down here, let's put it below my footer, right before the end of my form. Let's add a reference to Angular min. I'll just drag that in, and I'll get my script reference. Not bad. Now, I'm going to write some scripts into my page from my default ASPX, and I need them to appear after Angular min.js. So let's make sure we add an ASP content placeholder, and that's always running at the server, and I will call this scripts. So now I can place my Angular code beneath my Angular min file so that I'm sure that it always appears. Now, let's next take a look at the script manager up here. I turned on enable page methods. Now this is important because what will happen is if any methods are inside my code behind that are marked with a web method attribute, they'll be made accessible to me client side as a JavaScript method that I can call. It's very cool stuff. Means I can come back over to my code behind where I had my getTrips method that I was using for model binding. And instead of making this just a public method that returns trip objects, I'm going to make it a public static method so that it can be called outside the process of the normal page flow here. And I'll mark it as a web method. You may need to bring in the System Web Services namespace for this. Now, I don't have to change any of, if I just proceeded with my code looking like that, my GridView would still work. It still can find that select method and it can still execute things. But I don't want to use a server-side grid any longer. I want to use that client-side grid. So we need to get rid of this grid. And I'm going to use the server-side comment block to comment this out. I'm going to need to get rid of a little bit of this markup. There we go. All right, now with that removed, now I can start to build out my grid using standard HTML. So I'll create a table with an ID of grid, and let's put those same CSS classes on here. Table, table striped, and table hover. So I have that same feature. And then let's define a table head segment. All right, now let's define our body. We're going to have a, oops, not a tree view. We're going to have a row. And this row, we're going to start to define where Angular is going to land these capabilities. And we do that with some templating that starts with a double curly brace. Now this is how Angular folks refer to this sometimes as a mustache. So I want to output information inside this template I want Angular to format for the trip destination, and then I end my double curly brace. And then I'm going to also define trip.departure. I want to output the trip return, of course. And finally, the trip distance. There we go. Now, I need to tell Angular where to get this trip object from, and that I want to repeat this row for each one of the trips that we have. And I do that with the data-ng data-ng repeat. Nearly hit the wrong directive there. So data-ng repeat, trip in trips. So we're going to specify that this trips object exists, and we're going to iterate over it for each one of these rows. I'm going to wrap my table inside of I call this data-ng controller. This will be my controller. So we have a very similar model view controller construct with Angular client side. So I've indicated that the controller called my controller is going to operate inside of this div. I can next start to write the content that's going to be inside my JavaScript. All right, now I do that inside of a immediately executing function. So here's that function. That needs to be inside of a script block. So script, of course, type equals text JavaScript. There we go. And we want that to immediately execute. And it seems weird when some folks see this for the first time who aren't familiar with JavaScript, that you're going to define a function, wrap it in parentheses, and then put 2 parentheses afterwards. That's just the way that JavaScript will automatically execute this contents as soon as it's presented. So, first thing that we want to do is we need to reference an Angular module for the application, the Angular application that's living in our browser that we're going to maintain. Now, my application should really live next to my script definition for Angular, which is over here in Site Master, right? I've already got Angular living here, so I want to make sure that my Angular application lives here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way up here and on my form tag, let's say data ng app, and let's just call this my app. So inside of here, I need to define that as a module that Angular knows exists and it can work with. So I will do the same auto executing function, and I will just say Angular module. The name of it is my app, and it doesn't have any dependencies. Just create it. It's available for me right there. Back over on my default page now, I can say Angular module my app. We're going to define a new controller called myController, the same as what's up here, and you can see Visual Studio's giving me that helpful syntax highlighting to show that they're related. I'm going to bring in something called myController, and I'm going to depend on scope. Now, myController, this JavaScript object here, is being referenced, but it's not defined yet. We're going to exploit a feature of JavaScript called hoisting to define my myController object after it's been used. Check this out. By defining myController here and receiving that scope object, this function will be available to that execution on line 56. Pretty neat. I'm going to, inside of my controller, reach into my page methods and use that same method name that I had up here before, getTrips. So ASP.NET will make the getTrips method available to JavaScript with the same function name, and then I'm going to use this callback that it uses, where I'm going to be passed the result and the context. And when I get that trip information, let's log it to the console. And then I'm going to jam that result onto the scope in this trips object that we're going to iterate over. So I'll say scope trips. So trips is a property that doesn't exist on scope. I'm conjuring it here on line 63. Because JavaScript's a dynamic language, the first time that I assign something to it, it creates that property and jams it onto the scope object. So I'll apply that result, and then I need to apply that to my scope, because this will happen outside of process, asynchronously from the standard JavaScript Angular loop. So I'll call apply, and I think that's all I need here. So now let's build and let's see how this looks inside the browser. And there it is. And I've got my array of objects logged out to the console here. That's not bad. Right, so look, my object has a departure, destination, distance, all those properties that I had on my trip object. that I operated on server side. And it looks pretty good here. Now, I've got some time zone and time information here because what's being output is, it's a date time, not just a date in some format. So let's see what we can do to clean this up just a little bit. And also, I don't have my click capabilities that I really wanted when I pushed this data client side. So let's go back over to Visual Studio. Let's write some more JavaScript here to make this work a little bit cleaner and format nicely for me. So my distance, let's of course label that as miles. And let's trap my order by. Let's put some information around the default order and let the scope manage that. Give me that click to sort capability. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to define on scope an order by field. And let's start off sorting by departure. And I'll start off with a order by ascending property. And yeah, let's order by ascending true to start. So I've defined some way to store that order by information. Let's actually apply that sort now to my repeat loop here. And I'll do that with a filter called order by. And I'll order by the order by field and sort by order by ascending. So that gives me the ability here to sort the order of my trips here, and it's going to sort by departure. And now you can see I have it sorting in descending, right? Latest departure first order, right? And latest departure first order. Not bad. Let's go back over here and let's start adding some more features to this. I actually want it sorting the other direction first. So now let's also take a look at how we can make that click capability happen on my headers here, so it actually forces that order. So I'm going to wrap each one of these with an anchor tag so that I get that click capability. Now let's connect up what that click does. So we're going to define data ng click, and I'm going to change that order by field that we defined. I'm going to say order by field equals destination. And I'm also going to set the order by ascending. I'm just going to flip it so it's not order by ascending. That's all I really want to be able to do. So let's apply that same logic here to the other fields, the other column headers. All right, let's see how that works now. All right, now I've got my grid back, and I can click and sort, but I'm not getting the flash, right? I'm not getting that check back to the server. And if we take a look at our network tab here, I'll just do a reload so that I get that loaded back up. You can see the last thing it did here was call get trips. And if I start sorting, you see it's not doing the post back. Right, the last method there, and it's all doing the work client side. Let's do one more step here. Let's format these dates here. I don't like all that extra time zone information. I'll reach down into this date right here that we're outputting, and I'll apply another filter, and I will just say medium date. So this tells Angular that this is a date and to use the medium date format. Now with the medium date format, I get month, day, year in this format, but I really liked that short date format that I had over here. So let's flip back to the short date format. And I'll do that by just changing this filter name to short date. And I'll refresh. And there it is. And I can still do that sort. And this is all happening in the browser. Cool. All right. So I've taken my grid, I had it server side operating and looking not bad, looking kind of svelte here as a server side grid. And with a couple changes, I was able to reuse the exact same data format code, data fetch code, but make this an Angular grid that would allow me to interact with this data presented one time and sort it and interact with it locally on the browser. Stick with me here for a couple more videos. I'm going to go through and show some other ways that we can enhance our web forms code, do some other Angular and JavaScript tricks here client side so that we bring our applications more modern with cooler capabilities browser side and still make use of those great features that we have server side. This has been another one of Fritz's 10-minute tips.